Okay, Neal Stephenson, GM, welcome.
Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Stephen and I are very excited about this chat. Let's just start this way, and we'll get into Lamina One and what you're up to and your body of work. But where do you see things right now as they stand with the metaverse as a concept? Like, do you feel that it has progressed to the point of seriousness, still has a long way to go? I mean, how do you think the average person thinks of the metaverse?
Well, it definitely has a long ways to go. I think we've got the underlying technologies in place that are needed to actually build it, and that has not been true until pretty recently. But it's all there with sort of massively multiplayer online gaming technology, internet, high-speed internet, hardware, output devices of various kinds. People are comfortable using all of those. So I think we're kind of positioned to actually start building it. We've got a ways to go before it's a real thing.
What do you say to skeptics? And there are many out there. I mean, even me, I've certainly played a lot of video games, but I don't currently feel like, ooh, I'd like to go hang out in the metaverse and spend time there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the job of content makers to make cool stuff that will make skeptics happy. I mean, I have kind of an engineer mentality as opposed to a sales mentality. I'm not here to kind of try to pitch anyone or sell anyone on the idea of the metaverse. But I do think that once the right experiences are in place, people will want to come and use those.
Who do you think is going to build those experiences initially? Do you think it's going to come from the sort of AAA game studios with their, hyper-real engines? Or is it going to be more of a bottom-up development from the outset?
Well, it can be both. So bottom-up developers, small game developers, indies use the game engines that you're talking about. Those, the Unity and Unreal have both structured their businesses in such a way as to make their engines accessible to anyone who wants to use them. And so that's one of the really important building blocks. If you roll the tape back, 10 or 20 years, it might be the case that only big AAA studios would have access to really good engines. And so they would have had a natural kind of insuperable advantage. But you can download Unity or Unreal anytime you want and start building stuff with it. And both of those game engine companies are quite eager to support people who want to learn their engines. And along with that, there are suites of tools available like Blender, for example, which is free. Again, if you roll the tape back 10, 15 years, in order to get access to the capabilities of a program like Blender, you would have had to spend a lot of money on an expensive software license. So I do think it'll be small, independent creators, but they're going to use technology and tool chains that have been created over the last couple of decades by big companies.
And speaking of sort of the Metaverse Toolkit, you're working with the blockchain project Lamina One. Can you explain how that fits into that set of tools for creators?
Yeah, in order to make a metaverse that works, there's a set of, I think, engineering problems that need to be solved that where I see a kind of a natural overlap with what blockchain is capable of. So if you're building as you were talking about earlier, a classic AAA game, you can kind of have everything together in one deliverable, right? So all the shaders, all the textures, the animations, all of the other assets that make up a game can be contained in one project, one repo on Perforce or whatever, and can be downloaded to the user's machine as a kind of self-contained whole. in a metaverse situation, ostensibly it's similar. You have an avatar and you're walking around in a simulated 3D environment, but you're crossing boundaries. You might step outside the boundaries of one particular experience and cross the street and go into an experience that was created by someone completely different. And every time you do that as a user, you don't want to have to log out, shut a game down, and then go to a different site and log in and reclothe yourself in a new avatar and start over. You just want to walk around. You want all of your stuff to travel with you, your avatar, the clothing, the accessories that go with that avatar, the inventory of items that it's carrying around with it. And you would like that to just seamlessly work and keep working as you move around from one experience to another. And the thing is that those, all of that stuff that I just listed can be, and it typically is, created by different artists. You've got texture artists, you've got animators, you've got all these different people making different kinds of assets. And so what that implies is a really complicated interlocked economy where there's microtransactions kind of going on all over the place as these different systems interact with each other. So you can do that through one big centralized system, and you can do that using fiat, traditional fiat currency. And people probably will. People will probably find ways to do it. To me, it seems like an opportunity to use blockchain technology. It seems like kind of a natural fit. And so what we're trying to do is solve the engineering problem of setting up a layer one blockchain that's optimized for those kinds of applications, and to set up some tools and some affordances that developers might use in order to take advantage of it.
You must have been approached by a fair few metaverse projects over the years looking for endorsements. So what was it about this one that particularly grabbed you?
Not as many as you might think, because I don't know why, but maybe it's because I have a reputation of being grumpy and reclusive, or people didn't want to create a perceived liability somehow. But in this case, it's not an endorsement. So there's a difference between endorsing something that's already built by other people, and just signing on and saying this is awesome and then cashing a check, as opposed to co-founding something and being involved with its creation. In this case, I'm a co-founder, and the endorsement isn't for something that has already been built. It's something that is in the works, and the payoff, if any, only materializes if it's actually good for something. So, this is not a case where I'm getting a big upfront payment, or really any upfront payment, in order to say that this is cool. I have to wait before any financial payoff materializes, and it won't materialize unless this thing is a success.
How much of a identity change is that for you? I mean, you're obviously primarily known as an author. Now it's being a co-founder of a business. I mean, Have you done this before? Does it feel, are you comfortable in this space?
I've learned what I am and am not good at in this space. And so I am comfortable because we've structured this relationship accordingly. So I was with Blue Origin from its inception until about 2006. I worked at Intellectual Ventures Labs for a few years, participated in a transmedia startup called Subutai. I was the chief futurist of Magic Leap from 2014 to 2020. And I've worked on other transmedia stuff since then. And so that's a quarter of a century of experience working in various kinds of business environments, combined with me just knowing a lot of people in the tech business and talking to them about what it's like to start and run companies. And so just through experience, I've kind of learned what I'm good at, where I'm comfortable, and the relationship that we've structured with Lamina One is where I'm the chairman. And so chairman is a good place for me to be because it is a more distant relationship. There's not a lot of Neal having to make day-to-day decisions and kind of keep track of details and manage things on a granular level. Instead, I'm there to make myself useful, offer guidance, solve problems when they come up, talk to investors, et cetera. So we've been very clear from the inception of Lamina One that that's how it was going to work. And what I basically said when the thing started was that I was going to devote calendar year 2022 to putting more time into it, which I did, but that at the beginning of 2023, as fast as possible, we taper to a new state of affairs in which I'm the chairman and I'm speaking less, I'm traveling less, and I'm getting back to my real job, which is writing books.
So you kind of did a year of going to crypto conferences, doing the circuit. I mean, does it ever feel crazy to you that something you wrote fiction about, and I don't just mean the metaverse, there's also crypto with Cryptonomicon, but a lot of these concepts that were predictive and prescient in the past, now they're really coming to life? Or would you say, well, this is what I expected?
Oh, I didn't expect it. No, and certainly not in the form that it took. It's a mixed thing. I mean, when you sort of predict something or try to, we don't call it predicting, but you try to write a book set in a plausible future that makes sense. You're kind of staking a claim or making an assertion that this makes sense and this is something that could happen. When something like that gets used in the way that Metaverse has, of course, it's both unexpected and kind of expected at the same time. Like you wouldn't put that stuff in the book if you didn't think it kind of made sense, but it's a surprise when people agree with you, I guess. And so, yeah, when I was at South by 11 months ago, everywhere I looked, it was Metaverse this, Metaverse that on banners and posters and conference headings, and same at Consensus in June. So that's all completely wild and surreal, is and continues to be day to day.
I mean, you talk about the term metaverse being used all over the place, but many people are using it in a slightly different way than perhaps you'd envisaged. Do you think the term's been co-opted by centralized players like Meta? Do we need like a new terminology for the open metaverse?
I think open metaverse works pretty well. I think people, understand the way it works. Like, companies latch on to a word and use it for their purposes, in a way that helps them achieve their goals as a business. And it's left up to we as consumers to kind of look at that and, hopefully cast a skeptical eye on it and make our own judgments. There's a few common things that, in my opinion, people get wrong. One is to talk about a metaverse or multiple metaverses, which I think is wrong. That's always a signal to me that somebody doesn't get it. And another one is to assume that it's always about using goggles, which is a reasonable assumption. I mean, that's how it is in the book and in other depictions of virtual reality and fiction. So people automatically think, okay, it's got to be about goggles. But the situation that has actually emerged over the last couple of decades is that the way that people, billions of people, interact with three-dimensional simulated environments is through rectangles on flat screens, and that works really well. In some ways, it works better than using goggles for various reasons, and people have just adapted to using that. So those are a couple of areas where I think there's been a little bit of drift in the idea, but I understand why.
It's funny that you say it's a signal to people don't know what they're talking about if they say a metaverse or multiple metaverses. It's almost the inverse of the use of the term blockchain. You know, I always say that when a company or some corporate thing says, we'll do it on the blockchain, I know they don't know what they're talking about because they think there's just one. And it's like, well, blockchain is a form of tech. There are blockchains. It's just a great point.
I'm probably guilty of that myself, but it's a good point. It's like the internet, right? So I mean, nobody nowadays says an internet. People have all learned that there's just one, but that wasn't always true. I can remember at one point, probably circa the late 80s, some techie friend of mine correcting me because I had confused Ethernet and Internet. And of course, you know, now I look back on that like, oh my God, how could I have ever, you know, made that mistake? But in the early days of the technology, when everything's changing fast and conventions haven't really settled in, it's easy for that kind of thing to happen.
Let's dive into the book. Stephen and I actually reread Snow Crash for this interview, which was exciting and fun again. You know, I first read it in middle school and I felt like it was so formative for me. And when I say the book, I mean Snow Crash. Obviously, you've had many books. But when we talk about crypto, I imagine that's the one that comes up a lot, or at least in the metaverse. There's also Cryptonomicon, which is very relevant. But we're coming up on there. We just had the 30-year anniversary. It was 1992. It was published. So I know Sotheby's is doing this commemorative NFT and everyone's kind of rediscovering it. What's that been like? And what do you think you got right? And what did you get wrong in Snow Crash?
At the time I wrote it, I had spent a couple of years doing a lot of graphics programming as part of an art project, which is being commemorated at this auction, by the way. But the overwhelming takeaway that I got from that was just how expensive and complicated that kind of hardware was, and so what I was asking myself was, you know, how could, you know, this hardware has so much potential. You know, we could simulate whole worlds and we could run around in them. Not a new idea at the time, but what would it take? You know, why is it still just a laboratory curiosity? Why is it so expensive? What would have to change in order for it to become as cheap and ubiquitous as television is today? And so if there's anything new or original I did in that book, it was to posit this idea of the metaverse, which is basically the TV of three-dimensional graphics. And what emerged, as it happens, was that a year after the book came out, 1993, Doom came out, and the World Wide Web got started. And the web created it seems so archaic, to even remember this, but suddenly there was a reason for people to want computers that could show pictures. Because you click on a web page, you want the picture, the JPEG to load. And then Doom, just by being really brilliant on an engineering level, advanced the clock 10 years on computer graphics as an entertainment medium, because they figured out clever ways to create the illusion of that you were seeing a rendered three-dimensional world when it wasn't actually doing all that work. It was just sheer ingenious hackery at work, and I use that in the most complimentary sense. So suddenly, a year after the book comes out, there's these two huge trends that I didn't see coming, but both of them created a huge demand for graphics hardware and the software that makes it useful. And so that's what started driving the cost of graphics hardware down to the point where now, almost everyone, even who has just a modern phone, has got, a kind of 3D graphics supercomputer right there at their disposal. So I would say that, and another one was goggles. The idea that, as I mentioned before in the book, everyone's using goggles to do this. It seemed like a logical assumption at the time that would be the output device, but that's not what happened. What happened is that everyone is accessing these 3D worlds through two-dimensional flat rectangles.
I mean, it's interesting that you mention video games as being like the driving force behind the metaverse, because it feels like at the moment there's something of a roadblock between where we are at the moment and the fully open metaverse. And that is, what's the incentive for the people who are making these incredibly detailed virtual worlds, the sort of AAA games titles, to allow interoperability between their titles? Why would, for example, Rockstar and Bethesda let you take a sword from Skyrim and move it over to GTA?
Right. Well, they probably wouldn't. And so, and that's for really good reasons, right? So the people who make those games spend their whole careers building these coherent worlds that are exquisitely crafted, and making sure that every detail of the art direction is just so, and that it all meshes and contributes to a certain aesthetic whole. And one of the reasons that they tend to dislike the idea of interoperability is exactly what you said. Is if somebody brings a sniper rifle into my soccer game, or whatever, it's just an abomination from an aesthetic point of view, and it shows disrespect for what I do as a art director or a game designer. So, so I don't mean to suggest that games of that stripe are going to somehow adopt interoperability, or that they should. I hope that games will continue to exist as pure works of art, just like they are now. But there are also games, very popular games, that aesthetically are mashups, right? So if you go play Fortnite, your team might consist of John Wick and Iron Man and a blue banana, and somebody from, Obi-Wan Kenobi or whatever. Of course, that makes no sense from a narrative point of view, but people don't care. It's just everyone understands it's part of the fun, and it's just a way of, like, having a Iron Man avatar is just a way of saying that you kind of dig Iron Man, Minecraft, Roblox, other games like that are all have that mashup kind of feel, which I think is a much closer match for the spirit of the metaverse as described in Snow Crash. So when I talk about the metaverse emerging from games in the game industry, I'm not trying to say that AAA games as we know them can or should morph into metaverse experiences, but I'm saying that the kinds of people who are good at making those games, if they chose to apply their talents to make metaverse experiences, they've got the know-how and the mastery of the tool chain that would be needed.
And when you say, Neal, that something a lot of people are getting away from is the idea of goggles. Like, originally everyone's imagination of the metaverse involved goggles, even as recently as Ready Player One. The goggles, the haptic gloves.
Yeah.
You still see big companies though that do seem focused on the goggles. People are very
I worked at one.
Apple's. Yeah, Apple's goggles are supposedly going to be very big, but I'm with you. I mean, just personally, and maybe I'm already like past the age. Maybe I'm too old at 35 for wanting to put them on, but goggles don't appeal. I don't want to put on the headset,
Yeah.
So what do you think is going to happen with those? Apple, for example, is that going to be a success? Is there a market for that?
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not anti-headset at all. I know people who build those things for a living, and their capabilities are amazing and getting better all the time. It's just that you have to look at the reality of how people access these things today. You can't be building, you can't spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars making an experience that can only be used by the tiny minority of people who own these things. So you've got to make it work on flat screens as well. And for a bunch of reasons, I think flat screens are here to stay. I like to be able to look around, I like to have situational awareness of what's going on around me in the room. It doesn't bother me most of the time. It doesn't diminish my enjoyment of the experience. I can kind of switch modes between being immersed in the rectangle and, saying hi to somebody who's in the room or looking out the window. So the goggles are, I think, for most people, going to be something you put on for half an hour, 45 minutes. And during that time, you're going to have an amazing experience. But to keep them on for multiple consecutive hours, to me, it's just not something I would do.
Yeah. Sounds like something that will make me dizzy too.
Well, there's that. I mean, it's actually, they've driven down, there's all kinds of improvements that you can make to reduce the factors that lead to people getting nauseous, reduce lag and change the way the content works and so on. And those all work. Those all partially solve the problem, but there's kind of an irreducible percentage of people still who are just going to get sick when they wear these things. And so you have to ask yourself, when television was being introduced to the middle class of the world in the 40s and 50s, if it was the case that 5% of all people who watch television got sick, how would that have affected the adoption of that of that technology?
Speaking of digital realms or metaverse realms that are just on one screen, you don't need the goggles. What do you make of the current leading names in the crypto space, which really are the Sandbox and Decentraland? There are others, but those are kind of the two that get a lot of attention. I mean, respectfully, we're very early days, it seems to me still. They kind of look very 1.0. I want to read you a headline from our site. This is December 2021. The headline is, "Someone paid $450,000 to be Snoop Dogg's metaverse neighbor."
I remember that headline.
Yeah. I mean, does this seem like dumb money to you? Is this a smart investment? Will it play out? Will it be valuable 3 years from now?
Well, I don't want to make specific remarks about specific companies. To begin with, I just don't know enough about what their business plans are and what their finances are. So I'm not going to wade into that. But I think that what's wanted, if you want lots of people going into the metaverse and having experiences, you've got to create experiences that they enjoy having. I mean, it seems like a sort of a stupidly obvious thing to say, but there you have it. And if it's like purely a social space, cocktail party, kind of endless people talking to each other kind of thing, then you can get some traffic with that kind of experience. But sooner or later, people want to do something besides just sort of talk to each other and do, little emotes. Something that Fortnite's been kind of unexpectedly successful at is being a social space. A lot of people go there just to hang out and talk to each other. And you can play the game too if you want. But there's something about having both available that works better than just one or the other alone. And that's kind of an emergent thing. I haven't talked to anybody at Epic about it, but I'd be curious to know, like, when they started Fortnite, if they foresaw that people would just go there and hang out, or was that an emergent thing that surprised them? I don't know.
One of the other things that's accompanied the emergence of these sort of blockchain-powered metaverse platforms is the idea of obviously virtual scarcity and virtual resources having value. And accompanying that has been the emergence of phenomena like play-to-earn gaming, where people in emerging economies are sometimes grinding in these virtual worlds. Is that ethical? Is it exploitative? Should we be monetizing our free time in that way?
I actually did a whole talk about this at DICE last week. The question is, where does the scarcity come from? If I'm not at home now, I'm in a hotel, but if I were at home looking around at what's in my house, I would see a lot of books, I'd see furniture, a few other odds and ends. And in theory, every single one of those has got a cash value, right? So I could take every book in my house to a used book dealer and they would give me some money for it. I could take all my furniture and drag it out to the front yard and put up a sign that says garage sale. Some people say yard sale or jumble sale, but I could probably get at least a few bucks for everything there, but I don't. I choose not to do that because the intangible value that I attach to those items is greater than the cash value that I could get from them. So if I've got an old sort of dog-eared paperback book that I bought 30 years ago, its cash value is probably next to nothing. But but to me, it's important because I remember buying it. I remember reading it. You know, I've dog-eared the pages. I loaned it out to my friend, and he gave it back to me. You know, so it's got all these intangible connections that are more valuable to me than its cash value. And so, for me, that old book, on one level, it's not scarce at all because there's many like it, but on another level, it's priceless and, you know, extremely scarce because it's mine and it's the only one of its kind. And so I think that what happens when we explore virtual worlds and build things is that we're creating that kind of scarcity. I play a lot of Valheim with some of my friends, and we've built a house in Valheim. It's our little base, and you know, if it were possible to sell things in Valheim, we might be able to sell it, but we wouldn't because it means something to us. So I think that the way that we get a stable economy in the metaverse is by creating opportunities for people to build unique pieces of UGC that are like that. And then they might still one day go out and try to sell them, but probably not. And so you don't get people dumping assets onto the, you know, people when people talk about bubbles, usually the inevitable example that comes up is the tulip mania in the Netherlands in the 1600s. And you know, the thing about tulip bulbs is that you can live without them. You don't need them to stay alive. They're all kind of the same. I mean, there's different kinds of tulip bulbs, but essentially they're the same. And there's no sentimental value that would give you the slightest hesitation to sell them off if you thought they were going to lose their value. So when those conditions are met, then you've got an extremely volatile economy in which people are willing to dump whatever they've got onto the market at the slightest sign that the market might be going down. So the way to avoid volatility is to create more richly textured virtual worlds in which people don't want to dump all their stuff because it has intangible value and it's important to them.
What you've described is the crypto market. I mean, you've handed us a good transition because I wanted to ask you, you know, we've been focused so much on the metaverse, and then Stephen brought up NFTs and games, but are you also at all interested in and invested in crypto tokens? And as I often say, I think people too often now lump all of this stuff together. NFT, metaverse, crypto coins, it's all crypto. And I think that should probably change because NFTs are becoming its own kind of subworld. Same with metaverse and gaming.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of different generations of crypto that have come along. There was like first generation is, you know, Bitcoin, which is a purely financial object. And then next you get ETH, which is it's also does what Bitcoin does, but it's got smart contracts and other, you know, features. And then I think NFTs are sort of third gen in a certain way, and there'll be others as time goes on. And I think as that happens, the essence of this whole argument is that weirdly technical sounding term, non-fungible. So Bitcoin, ETH, etc., are fungible by design. One token is the same as another. That's what makes it into a currency. As soon as you go to non-fungible, what you're saying is that this piece of art, it's a token, it's on a blockchain. Notice I said a blockchain, Dan. And so it's got mathematical characteristics in common with a Bitcoin, but it's unique. It's non-fungible. That's the whole point of it. And so people still have this urge to financialize everything and try to make everything kind of flow together, which I don't think is helpful to that market. But it's a start. It's a step in the right direction, and we see these tensions playing out, like in this whole thing that blew up last week about secondary royalties, where suddenly it became widely understood that smart contracts aren't actually contracts. And so if you've got one that says that I, the artist, get secondary royalties, then that sounds great. But anyone can just ignore that anytime they want, and that's now been sanctioned by major exchanges. So that kind of thing is not helping, and I'm hoping that we can kind of move away from this sort of single-minded effort to financialize everything and start trying to develop a more diverse economy that, by virtue of that, would be a more stable economy.
I'm also asking what you hold in your crypto bags. What do you got?
Well, I'm not going to talk about that, but the nothing too exciting. I don't, like, somebody gave me a Bitcoin when it was a couple of $100, and I've still got like 0.999 of a Bitcoin somewhere. And some ETH, but I'm not a person who, I don't have the attention span to even pay attention to dollars, much less 2,900 different possible types of cryptocurrency. I'm not opposed to it. I don't hate it. I don't have time.
I wanted to end by asking you, maybe it's a deep question, but especially because you deal in science fiction, how do you feel about the planet and kind of our lives for the next decade? What's your outlook? You feel optimistic?
Yes and no. I think that we're in for some really bad times because of climate change. I think we'll solve it. I think we'll solve it through massive engineering efforts to hopefully just remove carbon from the atmosphere. So I think things will get bad, and then they'll get a lot better. I was just reading some interesting Twitter stuff today about how there's all these people who want to invest in climate tech who are coming at it from a software mentality. Their whole model of investing is, let's find the company that's going to, become a 100x company and make us a ton of money. And you can't do that with hardware. When you're dealing with the physical world, you need a new investment model. And these people don't get it. And so they're tending to put money into little, startups that move bits around instead of companies that build big hardware. But what we need to do is build big hardware. And it's going to be interesting because, like, essentially none of the meaningful steps that we can take to address the climate change problem are going to be interesting to tech investors, or be acceptable to traditional environmentalists. They're all going to involve building big equipment, which traditional environmentalists can't shake themselves out of this mindset of, if we just ride our bicycles to work and recycle our newspapers, and change our ways, that'll solve the problem. So we're in for some really interesting times with that. And I think we'll get through it because we have to. But it's going to be wild in the meantime.
Like those predictions. And of course, we've got the sale at Sotheby's of the Snow Crash NFT going on this week. So people should check that out. And Neal, thanks again.
Sure. Yeah. Check out the Sotheby's site. It's the Metaverse Snow Crash. It's Snow Crash, I think, is what it's called. We've got a sword and some manuscripts of the book and some NFTs and other goodies available there until the 6th of March.
Love it.
Fantastic.